Caleb Harrington learned that grief did not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a photograph of a folded note on a phone screen, as black ink on white paper, as one sentence written by the person he had hurt so badly that even his silence had become safer than his voice. You rejected me in public. So I chose my child in silence. He read it until the words stopped looking like words and became a mirror. In that mirror, he did not see the perfect Harrington heir, the alpha groom the city had applauded, the obedient son who had preserved a merger with a single cold sentence. He saw a coward standing beneath chandeliers, choosing the approval of men who had never loved him over the Omega who had believed in him when he had nothing honest left to offer. The phone trembled in his hand. The blue star handkerchief lay open on his desk, small and soft and unbearable. He imagined Ethan sewing it alone, perhaps in the Whitmore house, perhaps with one hand resting over the life growing beneath his heart. Had Ethan stitched that tiny star for the baby? Had he smiled when he did it? Had he imagined Caleb finding it one day and understanding? The thought tore through him so violently that he had to brace both hands against the desk. For years, Caleb had been trained to make pain useful. Turn shame into discipline. Turn fear into strategy. Turn longing into silence. But there was nothing useful about this. No contract could repair it. No apology could return Ethan to the moment before Caleb's words had broken him. No amount of power could unsay what had been said in a room full of witnesses. His father called 3 times. Madison called twice. The board secretary sent a message about the press schedule for the engagement portraits. Caleb looked at the screen until it went dark and then placed it face down on the desk like something poisonous. At dawn, he removed the engagement announcement draft from the Harrington family server himself. By 7, his father arrived at the penthouse with a security detail and the expression of a man who believed disobedience was a temporary illness. Richard Harrington did not knock. He entered as if every room Caleb occupied still belonged to him. You have created a problem, Richard said, his coat still buttoned, his silver hair immaculate, his voice calm enough to be deadly. Caleb stood by the window, the city pale beneath the morning fog. He had not changed from the night before. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw dark with the first shadow of a beard. He looked, for the first time in his adult life, like a man who had stopped performing wealth long enough to bleed. No, Caleb said. I became one. Richard's eyes narrowed. Do not be poetic with me. Madison's family is asking why the engagement feature has been delayed. Vale Holdings has already been briefed. The merger vote is in 11 days. Cancel it. The silence that followed was almost elegant in its brutality. Richard looked at his son as if Caleb had spoken in a language too primitive to deserve translation. You are not serious. Caleb turned from the glass. I am. Because of Ethan Whitmore. Richard said the name with the faint distaste of someone mentioning a stain. Because of my child. For the first time in Caleb's memory, his father's composure cracked. It was only a flicker, a small tightening around the mouth, but Caleb saw it and felt no triumph. Only exhaustion. You are certain? Richard asked. Yes. And you intend to do what, exactly? Chase after a frightened Omega who has already run to Nathaniel Pierce. Publicly humiliate Madison Vale. Hand-pierce the weapon he needs to make you look unstable. You think the world will call this love? They will call it scandal. They will call it weakness. They will call it exactly what it is, a disaster. Caleb walked to the desk and picked up the handkerchief, folding it carefully before placing it inside his breast pocket. The gesture was quiet, almost tender, and it seemed to infuriate Richard more than shouting would have. The disaster was letting you convince me that cruelty could look like control, Caleb said. Richard's face hardened. I convinced you to protect your name. My name did not stand alone in that ballroom. Ethan Whitmore is not your responsibility. Caleb's eyes lifted. Something in them had changed overnight. Not grown louder. Grown final. He was my responsibility the moment I promised him he would not have to hide. Richard took a step closer. His scent, cold leather and old cedar, pressed into the room like a command. You will not throw away an empire for sentiment. Caleb did not bow his head. The boy inside him, the one who had learned to flinch invisibly, waited for fear to come. It did not. There was grief. There was shame. There was a desperate, aching love that might never be returned. But fear of Richard Harrington had finally found something stronger than itself. I am not throwing away an empire, Caleb said. I am refusing to build one on my child's mother's humiliation. Richard looked at him for a long moment, and Caleb understood then that his father was not incapable of love. He was simply incapable of recognizing it unless it looked like possession. If you do this, Richard said softly, you will stand alone. Caleb thought of Ethan in the corridor of mirrors, crying where no one followed. He thought of Ethan walking down the Whitmore driveway with a canvas bag and a secret. He thought of the baby who had been present in the ballroom, unseen and unprotected, while Caleb chose pride. Then I will learn how it felt for him, Caleb answered. By noon, the Harrington engagement machine began to break apart. The official family account removed the announcement without explanation. 2 photographers received cancellation fees large enough to keep them quiet for exactly 6 hours. Madison Vale arrived at Caleb's penthouse at 1, wearing white cashmere and a smile sharp enough to open skin. She did not look heartbroken. That would have been easier. She looked insulted. You embarrassed me, she said, stepping into the living room without waiting for permission. In front of my family. In front of the board. In front of every woman who already thought I was settling for a man with too much ice in his veins. Caleb stood near the fireplace, where no fire burned. I am sorry. Madison laughed once. No, you are guilty. That is not the same thing. He accepted the blow because it was true. Madison removed her gloves slowly, finger by finger. Is it Ethan? Caleb did not answer. Quickly enough. Madison's smile thinned. Of course it is. Sweet little Ethan Whitmore. Always looking like the world bruised him by accident. Do not speak about him like that. Her eyes flashed. You defended him too late. Caleb had no defense for that. Madison moved toward the window, looking out over the same city Caleb had stared at all night. I knew, you know. His body went still. Knew what? That there was someone. She turned back to him. Not the pregnancy. I am not a monster, whatever you may think. But I knew you had someone hidden away. You smelled like roses after every charity gala, Caleb. You looked alive for exactly 3 minutes whenever his name was mentioned, then dead again when your father entered the room. Caleb's throat tightened. Why did you agree? Because my family wanted the merger, your family wanted my shares, and I was tired of pretending I had been raised for anything except usefulness. The bitterness in her voice was so clean it startled him. For the first time, Caleb saw Madison not as the woman beside him on the platform, smiling while Ethan broke, but as another child of elegant cages, sharpened instead of softened by them. You could have said no, he said. Her expression turned cold. So could you. The sentence landed between them without mercy. Caleb lowered his gaze. Yes. Madison studied him for a long time. Do you love him? Caleb touched the handkerchief in his pocket. Yes. Enough to lose. I already have. Something in Madison's face shifted then, not into kindness, but perhaps into recognition. She walked to the table, took off the engagement ring, and set it down on the black marble surface. The diamond flashed like a piece of frozen lightning. Then lose properly, she said. Do not make him pay for your repentance. Do not storm into his hiding place and call it love because you are desperate to stop hurting. If he ran, he had a reason. If he stays gone, that is also an answer. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. Madison moved toward the door, then paused. My father will punish yours for this. It will be ugly. I know. Good. She looked over her shoulder, her smile returning, smaller and more human. For what it is worth, Caleb, I hope the child has his courage instead of yours. Then she left, and Caleb stood alone with the ring he had never wanted and the truth he had earned. 90 miles north, Ethan spent the first 3 days in the lake cottage learning the shape of quiet. At first, he mistrusted it. Quiet had always been the place where orders arrived, his mother's soft knock, a servant's careful footsteps, Caleb's unanswered phone, the hush before a public wound. But this quiet did not demand anything. It let him sleep until noon. It let him cry into a borrowed pillow without witnesses. It let him wake in the blue hour before dawn and stand at the kitchen window with one hand on his stomach, watching mist rise from the lake like breath from a sleeping animal. Nathaniel came and went with the restraint of a man determined not to turn rescue into ownership. He brought groceries and prenatal vitamins. He placed a list of local clinics on the counter, along with the name of an Omega doctor who owed his family no allegiance. He did not ask about Caleb unless Ethan spoke first. He did not ask about the baby's father because he already knew, and because knowledge did not entitle him to Ethan's wounds. On the 4th morning, Ethan found a small box on the kitchen table. Inside was a phone, new and untraceable, with only 3 numbers saved, Nathaniel, Dr. Mara, and emergency. Beside it was a note in Nathaniel's neat handwriting. For when silence starts feeling like a prison instead of protection. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he cried, not because the gift was grand, but because it did not come with a chain. That afternoon, Dr. Mara came to the cottage carrying a leather bag, silver curls pinned at the back of her neck, her manner brisk but warm. She examined Ethan in the guest bedroom while Nathaniel waited outside on the porch in the cold, far enough away that Ethan could not send him through the door. Your blood pressure is higher than I would like, Mara said, adjusting the cuff around his arm. Stress will do that. Ethan gave a small, humorless smile. I have had some. So I gathered. Mara's hands were gentle as she checked his pulse, his scent, the small swell of his abdomen. Any cramping? Only that night. Not since. Bleeding? No, eating. Ethan hesitated. Mara lifted an eyebrow. Toast and tea are not a meal, sweetheart. The word sweetheart should have made him flinch. Instead, it landed softly. Ethan looked away. I am trying. Good. Try with soup next. When the portable monitor finally found the heartbeat, Ethan forgot how to breathe. It was fast, delicate, impossible. A tiny gallop in the quiet room. Not imagined. Not symbolic. Not scandal. Life. His child's life, filling the space where fear had been. Ethan covered his mouth as tears spilled over. Mara did not speak. She simply turned the volume a little higher. Outside, on the porch, Nathaniel heard nothing but the wind, yet when Ethan emerged 20 minutes later with red eyes and a trembling smile, he stood as if something sacred had passed through the house and changed its gravity. The baby is okay, Ethan whispered. Nathaniel's face softened. Then today is a good day. Ethan nodded, and for the first time since the ballroom, he believed such days might still exist. But the world they had left behind did not stay quiet. By the end of the week, gossip found the lake town like smoke under a door. A society blog posted a blurry photograph of Nathaniel's sedan outside the Whitmore gate. The headline did not name Ethan directly, but it did not need to. Harrington engagement delayed after midnight visit from rival heir. By morning, the comments had grown teeth. People who had never met Ethan called him unstable, opportunistic, ruined, manipulative. Some said Caleb had used him. Some said Ethan had trapped Caleb. Some said Madison had been lucky to escape. Others speculated about pregnancy with the careless cruelty of strangers turning a body into entertainment. Ethan read for 30 seconds before his hands began to shake. Nathaniel took the tablet from him without touching his fingers. No more. They are talking about me. They are talking about a shadow they invented. They will not stop. Nathaniel looked down at the screen, his jaw tight. No. Not if the families keep feeding them. Ethan's stomach turned. My mother? Likely. He did not soften the truth, and Ethan was grateful. Lies dressed as comfort had wounded him enough. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He sat on the floor beside the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the phone Caleb did not know how to reach. His old phone remained off in a drawer, heavy with messages he was afraid to read. The new phone lay silent on the coffee table. He thought of Caleb discovering the pregnancy. He thought of Caleb angry, regretful, ashamed. He thought of Caleb's hand in the greenhouse, warm around his, and hated himself for missing it. Missing someone did not mean they were safe. Love did not become proof simply because it hurt. Near midnight, the new phone rang. Ethan froze. The screen showed Nathaniel's name, though Nathaniel was in the next room. His heart kicked against his ribs. He answered with cold fingers. Ethan. Nathaniel's voice was low. I am sorry to wake you. There is someone at the road. Ethan stood too fast and swayed, one hand flying to his stomach. Who? A pause. Caleb. The room went soundless. For a moment, Ethan was back under chandeliers. Cream coat. Cameras. Caleb's eyes like winter glass. You were never meant to stand beside me. He sat down again because his knees had stopped being trustworthy. Did you tell him? No. I believe he followed one of my supply cars from town. He is outside the gate. He is alone. Ethan closed his eyes. Alone. Caleb Harrington had probably never gone anywhere alone in his life. What does he want? He says he wants permission to leave something. He says he will not approach the house unless you ask him to. Ethan almost laughed, because the Caleb he knew would have commanded entry, bought the road, moved the world until it opened for him. This Caleb waiting outside a gate in the dark felt like a stranger wearing grief in a familiar shape. Do you want me to send him away? Nathaniel asked. Ethan looked toward the window, though the road was too far to see. Every part of him was afraid. Every part of him wanted to know whether Caleb's face had changed when he heard the heartbeat that Ethan had carried alone. No, Ethan whispered. Let him leave it. 20 minutes later, Nathaniel came inside with a small brown envelope. He placed it on the table and stepped back. Ethan did not touch it at first. The envelope bore no Harrington seal, no expensive stationery, only his name written in Caleb's hand. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside was the blue star handkerchief and a letter. Not a long one. Caleb had never been good with written softness, but every word looked as if it had cost him something. Ethan, I found this in your room. I should not have gone there, and I am sorry for that too. I am not writing to ask you to come back. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness. I am writing because our child should have this, and because you should know that I understand one thing clearly now, I made you unsafe in front of the world. I will not demand entrance into the quiet place you built after surviving me. I have ended the engagement. I have told my father the truth I should have spoken sooner, though not your private truth. I will not announce your pregnancy. I will not let them use your body or our child as a bargaining piece. I do not know how to repair what I broke, but I know where repair must begin. Public wound. Public truth. You owe me nothing. Our child owes me nothing. If all I am allowed to do is protect you from a distance, I will spend my life doing that and call it mercy. Caleb. Ethan read it once, then again, searching for the hook hidden beneath the softness. There was no demand. No claim. No declaration that he had a right. Just the handkerchief returned and a sentence that made his chest ache, public wound. Public truth. He pressed the blue star to his lips and finally let himself sob, not because he had forgiven Caleb, but because the apology did not ask him to carry the weight of granting absolution. Outside, beyond the cottage lights, Caleb sat in his car by the road until Nathaniel returned with no answer. He had not expected one. Still, when the gate closed and the night settled back over the lake road, the emptiness beside him felt deserved. Did he read it? Caleb asked. Nathaniel stood a few feet from the car, hands in his coat pockets, his gray eyes unreadable. Yes. Caleb nodded. Is he all right? No, Caleb flinched as if struck. Nathaniel did not apologize. He is alive. The baby is stable. He is eating poorly, sleeping badly, and trying very hard not to love someone who taught him love could become humiliation in public. Caleb gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Thank you for telling me. I did not tell you for your comfort. I know. Nathaniel studied him. Then understand this. If you come here again without his permission, I will not care how sorry you are. Caleb looked up. In another life, in the life his father had built for him, he would have hated Nathaniel for standing between him and Ethan. Now he could only be grateful someone had stood there when he had failed to. I understand. Nathaniel turned to leave, then paused. He heard the heartbeat today. Caleb stopped breathing. The words entered him quietly and changed everything. The baby is healthy, Nathaniel said. That is all you are entitled to know. Caleb's eyes burned. Thank you. Nathaniel gave a curt nod and walked back through the gate. Caleb stayed there long after the cottage lights went out, one hand over his mouth, imagining a heartbeat he had not earned the right to hear. The next morning, Caleb did what Madison had told him to do. He lost properly. The press conference was announced at noon with only 3 hours' notice. Harrington Consolidated expected a statement about delayed engagement timelines and restructuring strategy. Richard Harrington tried to stop it. So did 2 board members, 3 legal advisors, and 1 public relations director who looked as if Caleb had personally set fire to her career. Caleb listened to them all and changed nothing. At 3, he walked onto a small stage in the Harrington Building's main press room wearing a dark suit, no tie, and the expression of a man who had mistaken silence for strength for the last time. Cameras flashed. Reporters called questions. His father stood at the back of the room, rigid with fury. Madison Vale stood beside her father near the side entrance, her face unreadable. Caleb stepped to the microphone and looked directly into the cameras. Last week, at a private family event, I announced an engagement to Madison Vale. The room quieted. That announcement was made under pressure from family and corporate interests. Miss Vale deserved better than to be used as an instrument of strategy. For that, I offer her my public apology. Madison's expression did not change, but her father's mouth tightened. Caleb continued. More importantly, there was someone in that room whom I hurt deeply. Someone I had made private promises to and then denied publicly when courage was required of me. I will not name him. His privacy is not mine to spend. But I will say this clearly, the failure was mine. Not his. He did not misunderstand me. He did not imagine my affection. He did not create scandal. I created harm, and I allowed others to watch it happen. A murmur rippled through the reporters. Caleb's hands rested steady on the podium, though inside him everything shook. The engagement to Madison Vale is ended. The merger discussions tied to that engagement are suspended. Any media outlet that publishes speculation about private citizens connected to my family will answer to my legal team, not because I wish to hide my actions, but because those I harmed should not be punished for them. Richard moved at the back of the room, but Caleb did not look at him. I was raised to believe power meant never kneeling. I was wrong. Sometimes power is the ability to admit, in front of everyone, that you failed the person who trusted you most. I failed him. I am sorry. That is all. He left the podium before questions could turn remorse into spectacle. By evening, the clip was everywhere. Ethan watched it at the lake cottage with Nathaniel standing silently near the kitchen and Dr. Mara beside him because she had arrived for another checkup and refused to leave until Ethan's hands stopped trembling. Caleb's face filled the tablet screen. His voice was steady, but Ethan knew him well enough to hear the ruin beneath it. He did not name him. He did not mention the baby. He did not claim love as proof of innocence. He simply placed blame where it belonged, in front of the same world that had helped make the wound. Ethan's first feeling was not forgiveness. It was relief so deep it frightened him. For days, the internet had turned him into a rumor with a body. Caleb's statement did not erase all of it, but it changed the shape of the story. People began deleting posts. Reporters shifted their hunger toward Harrington family pressure and the collapsed merger. Madison released a statement of her own, brief and brutal: "Mr. Harrington has told the truth. I consider our arrangement concluded. Please respect the privacy of all parties who were treated as collateral in a negotiation they did not design." Ethan read that sentence 3 times. All parties who were treated as collateral. For the first time, he wondered if Madison had also stood on that platform wearing a cage no one could see. The weeks that followed did not become easy, but they became possible. Caleb did not return to the cottage. He sent letters through Nathaniel once a week, each one shorter than the things he probably wanted to say. He wrote about practical matters: a trust placed privately for the child, controlled by Ethan until adulthood, legal protection against both families, a sealed medical directive ensuring Ethan's chosen doctor and chosen guardian would override any Harrington or Whitmore intervention if complications arose. Every offer came with the same line: "You may refuse this." Ethan refused half of them out of anger, accepted some out of necessity, and kept all the letters in a shoebox beneath the bed. In one letter, Caleb wrote only 4 sentences. "I started therapy today. I do not know how to be honest without first understanding how much of me was trained to survive by lying. I am not telling you so you will be proud of me. I am telling you because our child deserves a father who learns before he asks to be trusted." Ethan sat with that letter for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it at the top of the box. Spring came slowly to the lake town. Ice loosened from the shore. The bare vines along the cottage fence turned green. Ethan's stomach rounded until there was no hiding it, and for the first time in his life, he did not have to. He walked by the water in loose sweaters, one hand supporting the curve, Nathaniel beside him when he wanted company and behind him when he wanted space. The townspeople knew better than to ask questions. Perhaps Nathaniel had warned them. Perhaps kindness still existed in places old families did not own. Dr. Mara found the heartbeat at every visit, strong and quick, and once, during a scan, the baby turned just enough for Ethan to see a tiny hand opening and closing as if waving from another world. He laughed through tears. "Hello, little star," he whispered. That night, he almost called Caleb. He sat with the new phone in both hands, thumb hovering over a number Nathaniel had not saved but Ethan had memorized. In the end, he did not call. Healing, he was learning, was not the same as returning. But he did take a photograph of the ultrasound, the baby's tiny profile blurred but beautiful, and placed it in an envelope. For 2 days, he carried it around the cottage. On the 3rd day, he gave it to Nathaniel. "Will you send this?" Nathaniel looked at the envelope, then at Ethan. "Are you sure?" "No," Ethan said honestly. "But I want him to know the baby is still okay." Nathaniel nodded. Caleb received the photograph on a rainy Thursday afternoon in a therapist's waiting room. He opened the envelope before he understood what it was. The world stopped. The image was gray and grainy, a small curve of head, a small shadow of body, a tiny impossible person floating in secret light. On the back, in Ethan's handwriting, were 3 words, "Still with me." Caleb pressed the photograph to his chest and bent forward until his forehead nearly touched his knees. He did not sob loudly. The Harrington in him still made noise difficult. But the grief came anyway, shaking and silent and clean. When his therapist opened the door and saw him, she said nothing about composure. She simply sat beside him in the waiting room until he could breathe. In late summer, Victoria Whitmore tried one final time to reclaim the story. She arrived in the lake town without warning, traveling in a silver car with tinted windows and a lawyer in the front seat. Ethan saw her from the kitchen window and felt the old fear rise so quickly he nearly dropped his glass of water. Nathaniel was away in Chicago. Dr. Mara was due in an hour. For one terrible moment, Ethan was 19 again in the Whitmore foyer, listening to locks click shut. Then the baby moved. Not a flutter this time, but a firm, rolling press beneath his ribs, as if reminding him he was no longer alone inside his own body. Ethan placed both hands over his stomach and breathed. He did not open the door when Victoria knocked. He opened the window beside it and looked out through the screen. His mother stood on the porch in ivory linen, perfect as ever, though the months had sharpened her face. "Ethan," she said, as if they had simply misplaced each other after a party. "You look well. Why are you here?" Victoria's gaze lowered to his stomach. Something passed through her expression too fast to name. "You are still my son." Ethan almost believed she meant it. That was the cruelest part. "You did not come because I am your son. You came because you heard the Harrington board is voting next week and you want to know whether my child can still be used." Victoria's mouth tightened. "You have grown harsh." "No," Ethan said. "I have grown accurate." The lawyer shifted behind her. Victoria's voice softened, and that frightened Ethan more than anger. "You do not understand what it is to carry a family name. I was not born with choices either. I learned to survive by making myself useful before anyone could discard me. I tried to teach you the same." Ethan looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw not only the woman who had locked doors, but the girl she must have been before the world taught her love was a negotiation. The pity that rose in him was real, but it was not surrender. "Then I am sorry for what happened to you," Ethan said. "But you do not get to pass the cage down and call it protection." Victoria's eyes brightened with something like pain. "Let me come in." No, the word no longer shook in his mouth. Victoria stared at him through the screen. "Caleb Harrington will hurt you again." Ethan's hand moved over his stomach. "Maybe. But that choice will be mine to make, not yours to prevent by hurting me first." A car came up the road then, fast enough to scatter gravel. Caleb stepped out before it had fully stopped. He looked thinner than Ethan remembered, darker under the eyes, no polished entourage behind him. He had not come to see Ethan, the shock on his face proved it. Nathaniel must have called him, or perhaps some legal alert had gone out the moment Victoria's lawyer entered town. Caleb stopped at the foot of the porch, his eyes meeting Ethan's through the screen only briefly, asking without words whether he had permission to stand there. Ethan did not invite him closer, but he did not send him away. Caleb turned to Victoria. "Leave." Victoria lifted her chin. "This is a family matter." "No," Caleb said. "It stopped being a family matter when you tried to turn a pregnancy into a cover story." The lawyer went pale. Victoria's eyes flashed. "Be careful, Caleb. Your own house is made of glass." "I know," he said. "I broke it myself." There was no arrogance in his voice, and somehow that made him sound more dangerous than any Harrington threat. "Every legal protection Ethan has refused from me, I documented anyway. Every attempt from either family to pressure, coerce, relocate, medicate, marry off, or publicly expose him will trigger release to 3 independent attorneys and 2 journalists who dislike my father more than they dislike yours. If you want war, Lady Whitmore, understand that I am no longer defending the empire that taught me to lose him." Victoria looked past him to Ethan. "Is this what you want? Harrington men fighting at your door?" Ethan opened the door then. Not wide. Just enough to step onto the porch, one hand against the frame, his belly round beneath a soft blue shirt. Caleb's breath caught at the sight of him. He tried to hide it. Failed. Ethan saw the love and pain cross his face and felt his own heart answer before he could stop it. But he spoke to his mother. "I want you to leave. I want you to tell anyone who asks that your son is healthy, unavailable, and not yours to manage. I want you to become someone my child might one day meet without fear. And if you cannot do that, I want you to stay away." Victoria's composure trembled. For one moment, Ethan thought she might reach for him. Instead, she drew herself upright, because pride was the only language she had practiced long enough to speak fluently. "Very well," she said. She turned, descended the steps, and left without another word. Only after her car disappeared did Ethan realize his hands were shaking. Caleb stood at the bottom of the porch, still as if movement might startle him. "I am sorry," he said. Nathaniel called. He said she was coming with counsel. "I should have waited at the road, but thank you," Ethan interrupted. Caleb's mouth closed. The two words hung between them, fragile as glass. Ethan was suddenly aware that this was the first time they had stood face to face since the ballroom. No chandeliers. No Madison. No fathers. No crowd. Just the lake wind, the porch, and the child between them. Caleb's gaze lowered only once to Ethan's stomach, then lifted immediately, as if even looking required permission. Ethan saw the effort and hated that it mattered to him. "Do you want to?" The words caught. Caleb did not move. "Only if you want me to." Ethan looked down at the curve beneath his palm. The baby shifted again, a slow press toward the side where Caleb stood. Betrayal had memory. So did love. Ethan stepped down one stair. Caleb's face changed with hope so sudden it was almost painful to see. "You can feel," Ethan said quietly. "Once." Caleb approached as if walking into a chapel. He stopped an arm's length away. Ethan took his wrist, placed Caleb's hand gently against the right side of his belly, and covered it with his own. For a moment, nothing happened. Caleb did not breathe. Then the baby kicked. Small. Definite. Alive. Caleb's eyes filled instantly. His knees buckled, not fully, but enough that Ethan tightened his hand around his wrist. "Oh," Caleb whispered, and the sound was so broken that Ethan had to look away. The baby kicked again, as if answering. Caleb bowed his head over their joined hands but did not press closer. "Hello," he said, voice shaking. "I am your father. I am so sorry I was late." Ethan closed his eyes. The apology was not enough. Nothing would ever be enough for the ballroom, the corridor, the weeks of fear. But it was real. It had arrived without demand. It had kneeled where pride once stood. And some wounded part of Ethan, the part that had loved Caleb before power got its hands on him, loosened one careful breath. The birth came during a storm. Autumn rain battered the cottage windows, turning the lake black and silver, and the wind moved through the pines with a sound like rushing waves. Caleb had been allowed to visit once a week by then, always with Ethan's permission, always leaving before sunset unless asked to stay. He had painted the nursery walls pale yellow under Nathaniel's supervision, assembled the crib wrong twice, learned to cook soup from Dr. Mara, and attended parenting classes online with the grim seriousness of a man preparing for a hostile corporate acquisition. Ethan laughed at him once when he held a diaper backward for the third time, and Caleb had looked up so startled by the sound that Ethan laughed harder until he cried. Trust did not return as a flood. It returned as teaspoons. Caleb accepting no. Caleb leaving when asked. Caleb answering difficult questions without hiding behind childhood. Caleb admitting that love without courage had become another form of harm. Ethan did not forgive him all at once. Some days he missed him so badly it felt like hunger. Other days he remembered the ballroom and could barely look at him. Caleb endured both. He did not ask which version of Ethan was real. He understood all of them were. When Ethan's water broke just after midnight, Caleb was sleeping badly on the sofa because Dr. Mara had declared the roads too dangerous for anyone to leave and Ethan had allowed him to stay downstairs. Nathaniel was in the guest chair by the window, fully dressed, because he trusted storms even less than he trusted old families. Ethan stood in the bedroom doorway in an oversized shirt, one hand gripping the frame, his face pale with shock. "I think," he said, then stopped as another contraction stole the rest. Caleb was on his feet before Nathaniel fully woke. But he did not rush to touch him. "Ethan." Ethan looked at him through the pain, frightened and fierce and beautiful. "Call Mara." The next hours became a world made of rain, breath, pain, and hands that did not let go. Dr. Mara arrived wrapped in a soaked coat, swearing at the weather and the universe with equal authority. Nathaniel boiled water because stories had taught him births required boiled water and Mara did not have the heart to tell him to stop. Caleb stayed exactly where Ethan told him to stay, beside the bed, behind his shoulders, his hand offered but not forced. When the pain peaked, Ethan grabbed him hard enough to leave bruises. "Do not tell me I am strong," Ethan gasped. Caleb bent close, tears running freely down his face. "Then I will tell you the truth. You are not alone." Ethan sobbed once, from pain or memory or both, and held on. Dawn broke gray over the lake just as their son entered the world screaming. Small, furious, perfect. Dr. Mara placed him on Ethan's chest, and every person in the room went silent. The baby rooted blindly against Ethan's skin, his tiny fists clenched, his dark hair damp, his scent new and warm and impossibly sweet, carrying white rose after rain and the faintest whisper of cedarwood in winter air. Ethan looked down at him and became something Caleb had no language for. Not healed. Not untouched. Something greater. A person who had walked through fire carrying a star and delivered him into morning. "He is here," Ethan whispered. Caleb stood beside the bed with one hand over his mouth, shaking so hard Nathaniel quietly moved a chair behind him in case he fell. Ethan looked up after a long moment. His eyes were exhausted, wet, luminous. "Do you want to hold your son?" Caleb made a sound that might have been yes and might have been prayer. Mara helped transfer the baby into his arms. Caleb held him as if the entire world had narrowed to 7 pounds of fragile warmth. The baby stopped crying almost immediately, blinking up at him with unfocused eyes. Caleb lowered his forehead to the tiny blanket. "I will spend my life deserving the second chance you did not have to give me," he whispered. Ethan heard him. He did not answer. But his hand reached out, tired and trembling, and rested against Caleb's sleeve. They named him Rowan Elias Whitmore Harrington. Whitmore. First because Ethan had survived that name and chosen to remake it. Harrington second because Caleb had finally learned a name was not an inheritance unless love made it worthy. Nathaniel signed the birth certificate as witness and pretended not to cry until Dr. Mara handed him a towel and told him subtlety was not his gift. News of the birth did not leak for 3 weeks. When it did, it came not as scandal but as a photograph Ethan chose himself, Rowan's tiny hand wrapped around Caleb's finger, Ethan's hand resting over both of theirs. No faces. No location. The caption was simple. "Our son arrived safely. We ask for peace as we learn to be a family." For once, the world listened longer than expected. Madison sent a silver rattle engraved with a tiny fox and a note that read, "May he inherit everyone's courage and no one's obedience." Victoria sent nothing for 2 months. Then, one winter morning, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a hand-knitted blue blanket, imperfect at the edges, and a card with only one sentence. "I am learning how to love without arranging." Ethan cried when he read it. He did not invite her to visit yet. But he kept the blanket. A year later, on the first anniversary of the night Ethan left the Whitmore estate, Caleb returned to the greenhouse behind the old house where everything had once begun. Not the Whitmore greenhouse. Ethan would never live behind those gates again. This greenhouse stood on land Caleb had bought by the lake and placed entirely in Ethan's name. It was small, warm, filled with white roses, orange trees in clay pots, and a stone bench near a fountain that Rowan liked to slap with both hands whenever Ethan brought him there. Snow fell softly beyond the glass. Inside, the air smelled of earth, flowers, baby soap, and the soup Nathaniel had abandoned on the stove because he claimed Rowan had personally requested a walk. Ethan stood near the roses with Rowan on his hip, the child's dark curls falling over bright blue-gray eyes that looked like both his father's and neither of them, entirely himself. Caleb watched from the doorway, carrying no ring at first. He had learned that love did not begin with asking to be chosen. Love began with making choice safe. Ethan looked over. "You are staring." Caleb smiled, nervous in a way Ethan now found painfully dear. "I am remembering. Dangerous habit. Sometimes." Caleb crossed the room slowly. Rowan reached for him, babbling, and Caleb took him with the practiced ease of a father who had changed more diapers than any Harrington board member would ever believe. He kissed Rowan's cheek, then looked at Ethan. "I made you a promise in a greenhouse once." Ethan's expression softened but did not lose its shadow. Some memories would always carry weather. "You did." "I broke it." "You did." Caleb swallowed. "I cannot ask to erase that. I cannot offer you a perfect version of what should have happened. But I can offer you the truth I was too weak to speak then." He shifted Rowan to one arm and reached into his coat, not for a ring box, but for a folded piece of paper. Ethan took it cautiously. It was a legal document transferring Caleb's remaining voting power in Harrington consolidated into an independent trust that could not be influenced by Richard Harrington, Vale Holdings, or any marriage alliance. Ethan stared at it, confused. Caleb's voice was quiet. "No one will ever be able to use my inheritance to force my hand again. Not my father. Not a board. Not a family name. If I stand beside you now, it is because I choose you freely. If you stand beside me, it will be because you are free to walk away." Ethan's eyes filled. "Caleb. I love you," Caleb said. "I loved you badly before. Cowardly. Privately. I am asking if I may love you better. Publicly when you want public. Quietly when you want quiet. As Rowan's father always. As your partner only if you choose." Rowan chose that moment to grab Caleb's mouth with one tiny hand, making a delighted squeal. Ethan laughed through tears. The sound filled the greenhouse, warm as sunlight. Caleb laughed too, helplessly, and kissed Rowan's palm. Ethan looked at them both, this alpha who had shattered him and then spent a year learning not how to be forgiven, but how to become safe, this child who had turned a scandal into a sunrise, this greenhouse that was not a hiding place anymore but a room full of growing things. Ethan stepped closer. "I am not the boy who believed promises because he needed them to be true," he said. Caleb nodded, tears bright in his eyes. "I know. I am not coming back to the Harrington world. I know. If your father insults our son, I will throw soup on him." Caleb's mouth trembled. "Nathaniel has already offered to help." Ethan smiled. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the blue star handkerchief, worn now from being kept, carried, washed, and held. He tied it gently around Rowan's wrist like a tiny banner. "I do not know if forever begins again all at once," Ethan said. "But I know I want tomorrow with you." Caleb closed his eyes as if the words hurt in the best possible way. "Tomorrow is more than I deserve." "Yes," Ethan said softly. "But it is what I am offering." Caleb did not kiss him immediately. He waited. Ethan noticed and loved him for it. Then Ethan leaned forward and kissed him first, gently, with Rowan between them laughing because his fathers' faces were close enough to pat. Outside, snow continued to fall over the lake, quiet and clean. Months later, they held no grand wedding. No ballroom. No chandeliers. No cameras flashing over wounds. They married in the greenhouse at sunset, with Rowan asleep in Nathaniel's arms, Madison standing beside Dr. Mara in a dark green suit, Victoria sitting in the back with the blue blanket folded over her lap and tears she did not try to hide. Richard Harrington did not attend. Caleb did not look for him. Ethan wore cream again, not as costume, not as camouflage, but as choice. When Caleb spoke his vows, he said Ethan's name clearly in front of everyone who mattered. Not loudly. He did not need to. The greenhouse held the sound like a blessing. Ethan Whitmore, Caleb said, voice steady, eyes wet, I choose you where the world can hear me, and I choose you in every silence after. Ethan smiled then, not like someone rescued, not like someone repaired by another person's regret, but like someone who had walked out of a locked house and built a life wide enough for love to enter without becoming a cage. Caleb Harrington, he answered, I choose the man who learned how to stand beside me, not in front of me, not above me, and never again in my way. Nathaniel coughed suspiciously. Madison handed him a handkerchief with the dry elegance of someone pretending not to cry herself. Rowan woke halfway through the kiss and objected loudly to not being the center of attention, which made everyone laugh, and that laughter rose into the glass ceiling where white roses trembled in the warm air. Years later, when Rowan was old enough to ask why there was a tiny blue star framed above the nursery door, Ethan would lift him into his lap and tell him a softer version of the truth. He would say that once, before Rowan was born, his papa had been very afraid, and his father had been very foolish, and the world had been too loud. He would say that Rowan was the little star who helped them find the road out of the dark. Caleb, sitting beside them, would never interrupt to defend himself. He would hold Ethan's hand and let the story be honest. And when Rowan asked, with the seriousness only children possess, whether all stories with sad beginnings could still become happy, Ethan would look across the room at Caleb, at the man who had once denied him beneath chandeliers and now spent every ordinary morning making breakfast badly, reading bedtime stories dramatically, and loving without hiding. Ethan would kiss Rowan's dark curls and answer, not by magic, little star. By choice. Again and again, by choice. Then Caleb would reach for them both, and Ethan would let himself be held, not because he needed someone to save him, but because he had learned the difference between a cage and an embrace. Outside their home, the lake would shine under the morning sun. Inside, white roses would bloom in glass jars along the windowsill. And Ethan, who had once believed he might survive if Caleb only said his name, would understand at last that survival had become something larger, warmer, and brighter than he had ever dared to imagine. It had become Rowan laughing between them. It had become Caleb's hand open instead of clenched. It had become a life where love no longer asked him to disappear in order to be kept. It had become home.